So let's talk about a little something off the wall. Another aspect of spiritual warfare for you to consider. How many of you are familiar with this verse? First Thessalonians 5:23, which states, "Now may the Elohim, the God of peace himself, sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit and soul and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Master Yeshua the Messiah, aka also known as the Lord Jesus Christ." Here's a rhetorical question. What does that mean? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today as we talk about deliverance for the body. Question mark. So the word sanctify means to be made whole, uh, or holy, as some Bibles have, may write, to purify, to consecrate. The word seems to have lost its meaning today, as many people think that you just need to believe. Um, Anyways, Paul is basically saying that our spirit, our soul, and our body can get defiled, fragmented, oppressed spiritually, even. Um, you can look at 2 Corinthians 7:1 also as well. But I need to say this up front because I know that many people are not going to hear what I'm saying, and I understand that, and I know some of the reasons why, um, and that's okay. Many times it's because you're trying to apply earthly logic to spiritual concepts, and many times that will keep you from getting the greater revelation. It does apply at times, yes, applying earthly logic to spiritual concepts. Yes, in some cases, yes. But if you get a spiritual concept and you're wanting to know exactly how it works and you want to get down into the micro level, good luck with that. Sometimes we may get some revelation and then, we may get the understanding at that time. We may get it later, or you just may never get it at all. I'm not saying that it's wrong to ask questions in the test. You know, I'm just saying that that will only go so far because at some level, at some point, you have to take it on faith. Bible says that, yeah, God is very big on faith. Believe me, I have all kinds of questions that I ask, and I believe that as long as I question with the right heart attitude, humbly, I mean, with the openness to learn and not to lean on my own earthly logic, is when I get the greater revelations. Now, keep this verse in mind, as Yeshua said in Matthew chapter 8, verse 13, starting there, and said, "Truly, I say to you, unless you turn and become as little children, you shall by no means enter into the reign of the heavens. Whoever then humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the reign of the heavens." Little children question, but at some point they're like, okay, good enough. That's all I need to know. And they move on. Myself, I kind of hate it when they grow up and no longer accept the word magic for every question that they have that I can't answer. But that's just on an earthly level. They're like, well, what about this? I'm just like, it's magic. They're like, oh, okay. Yeah, kind of cute, adorable. Um, I'm going to say some things and you're going to question me, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. However, I do think it's a little childish, not childlike, when people shut down what I'm saying just because of their own viewpoints without even testing or considering what I have to say. They will not allow themselves to be challenged. I'm not saying I'm right on everything, but try it out. You know, but to each his own. I'm just trying to help people read and teach them how to fight for their own blessings. I had a chance to visit Dan Duvall of Bride Ministries this past year as I was visiting some people in Houston, Texas. And I told him that I thought that his teaching on the Arche was a little bit out there for me until I was in a session and I actually felt led to use that tool, and it actually worked. I was amazed. And Dan just looked at me, he says, "Yeah." He's like, "You can't argue with results." So I tell you these things because I've had to learn to have a much different attitude these days. Until you test and experience some of the things I'm saying for yourself, that I'm saying, um, that you may have a hard time believing me, for yourself. I get it. Um, but I pray that this will help those that can receive what I am saying. So I've made some shorter videos, and in some of my other videos, I've talked about how the Bible says that we are spiritual houses, temples, tents, and how that applies spiritually. I'm going to take that concept a little bit further in this video. I remember a few years ago, I was working with a lady and she was getting attacked by a witch coven. And we eventually found these entities. I think they were soul fragments as opposed to unclean spirits. But regardless, the same rules apply. So it doesn't really make a difference. But, anyways, at some point in time, we found that these entities, we discovered that they were actually hiding in her feet. And I recall them saying, "Oh, we didn't think that she would ever find us here." And we dealt with them. And after that, she told me, she was like, she's like, "I've been having problems with my feet and my shoes and walking or something like that for the past few months." Well, I believed her after we went through that experience. Um, and you may ask, "Well, Noe, why did these entities tell you that?" Well, for reasons, not completely known to me, sometimes the evil entities will give up valuable information, but you have to learn how to test and discern that, to see if it's valid or not. Um, and I understand that some people only like hearing from the Godhead. And hey, if that's your position, you go with that. You do you. But I do find that, when you bind the spirits, as we're called to do, um, that when you have them bound, what do you do when you typically bind someone? You're interrogating them. And so at times I will interrogate them. And sometimes I've had the unclean spirits tell me, "I'm not sure why I'm telling you this, but blah." They'll put out some key, something that is, important in that situation. So in some cases, I believe the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, is putting pressure on them to confess something, even if they're unaware of it, just as much as I'm unaware of it. And that may not happen all the time, but it does happen sometimes. You just have to trust that as you step out, that things are going to happen that you can't explain, as I said earlier, or you might get some revelation. And it's quite the adventure. I will have to say that. Okay, moving on. So our body is made of cells, right? Do you know what the word cell means? It means a small compartment. And so, for example, when a person, say they're in prison, they get put into a cell, which could also be called a room, a small compartment, which could also be a room in our spiritual temple or house. So these entities were occupying a room in her house. That's just one example. Let me throw some others at you. Um, Arthur Burke did of the Sapphire Leadership Group did a free series called Doing Deliverance on Your Brain, which was fascinating to me. And so during that time, I also picked up on the fact that our human spirit portions have parts of the brain that they specialize in. And I'm not going to get into all that, but I'll give you some examples here. So with my clients, uh, in some instances, we have had their human spirits uh, to look at different parts of the brain. And how can I do this? It's because we are metaphysical beings. What happens in the spirit realm affects what happens in the earthly realm, and what goes on in the earthly realm affects the spiritual realm. I think that's pretty believable and simple and understandable, but it happens in some very interesting ways. Before I continue, I guess I should say, if you're having problems with this type of understanding, uh, following some of these generic concepts, you may want to watch some of these Walk with God videos. Um, Walk with God video L20, as in live stream 20, which is our spiritual being, metaphysical realities, or even Walk with Yah, the live stream number 69, L69, a spiritual warfare key, abstract thinking. Anyways, since physical space isn't such a big deal to the various entities, you know, they can get into what we consider very small parts of our physical body pretty easily. It's not really a problem. When working with the human spirits and or portions, we'll find all kinds of stuff in various parts of the brain. Sometimes there'll be spiritual devices. Just had this one recently, um, where a person had a recorder on, they sensed a recorder, their spirit told me about, um, that was on the external part of their brain. Run into metal bands that are on the brain where the spirit's like, oh, I didn't know that was there. And we've had to go to the Godhead to be like, how do we get this off? You know, I have no clue what that metal band did. I just wanted it gone because I knew it was a aftermarket device that the enemy put on them. But many times when systematically going through the brain, we'll find all kinds of stuff. We found structures such as walls. Uh, we found, portals to hell, different types of entities, caves that, I could see in the spirit had roots, all around them. And in that particular case, those roots represented Kabbalah, which can easily turn into some evil, wicked, mean, and nasty stuff. We found some of these structures in a person's occipital lobe, as the enemy didn't want him to process, what he was supposed to be seeing or what he had seen. Maybe in the physical realm, maybe in the spirit realm. I don't know. I don't necessarily know how all that stuff crosses over. Even recently, I ran into a demon who was saying that through deception, he had trapped my client. This was a demon of deception. That he said, once I'm in her mind, um, that he deceived my client, and those beliefs would actually morph, would actually change, eventually, over time into a wall like iron. Uh, so, like in the spirit realm, that version of the mind, I guess, kind of changes. Which, if you can picture uh, a stronghold, because a lot of people talk about strongholds in the mind, that's what it kind of looked like in the spirit realm. It was like an iron wall. And there are many concepts in the earthly realm that we consider to be abstract, but in the spirit have tangibility. They can be spiritually, physically touched, grasped, handled. I experience this with my clients all the time. Consider what the Bible has to say in Hebrews 11:1, in the beginning of that verse. And faith is the substance of what is expected. So, as one strategy the enemy uses, there are spiritual structures that keep the flow of Yah's purpose and life flowing through us and our activities. Um, when I was first learning with working with the human spirit, um, in my inner world, I saw the river of life, except I saw it as a stagnant pond with lily pads, and four hippos, possibly leviathans, were eating trash. At the time, I didn't know. I was like, well, what the heck is that? And if you think of a river, it's supposed to flow. So there was some stagnation there that's how it was being represented. And, I had to deal with that. And so, anyways, how many of you know when you've prophesied or been prophesied over that people see a wall? That's a structure that is blocking the person. And just consider that, maybe that wall that was prophesied over that you saw or whatever we're speaking about was in a particular part of their body. Maybe, not saying it happens all the time, possibility. Um, but there are other structures in various parts of the body that might be impeding your health as well. Since the pandemic, we've learned so much about pharmakia. We've learned a little bit about how big pharma operates, in part, how they hide the natural remedies, the data and voices and stuff like that, speaking that type of stuff out, silencing any opposing ideas, discovering how our bodies work, how the natural remedies work, and then they engineer a replacement that also brings some more disease along with it, although it may not happen right away. Now, of course, there are some benefits to the meds we take. Um, if you know my story, I almost died in a very bad accident, and then a few times in the hospital. So I'm thankful for hospitals. Please don't get me wrong. I'm thankful for the doctors. And I think hospitals are good if you're in a life-threatening situation. But in terms of maintenance, there's probably a much better way to deal with that, which might require eating less processed foods and exercising. Um, and I believe that the nanotech that is currently invading our bodies through, uh, for medical stuff like that, is not good, and the end result is not going to be very good. You'll be constantly monitored in every way. A lot of bad to go with that. I'm not going to get into that. So, First Thessalonians lists again that we talked about 5:23 that we are spirit, soul, and body, with the spirit being first on the list. I think that was put there because it is first. It is should be prioritized first. But we tend, as people, tend to minister to ourselves in the reverse order. We know a good bit about the body. There's hospitals and stuff all over the place. Um, and we know, a little less about the soul and even less about the spirit. How much, how much can your human spirit do to get you healed? I don't know. I'm still playing with that. And I can't say that me myself that I've experienced any 180-degree turns in a short period of time, although I hear that does happen. So please don't let my experience limit you and what might possibly could be done. Maybe you'll get much different mileage. I have seen uh, many miraculous healings when I've prayed for that many times. Again, there is no one method that works all the time, and there's just so many variables of why that does or does not happen. So I'm just trying to make you aware that our bodies are affected spiritually. Maybe you don't need all the meds, but the demons are trying to make you sick or even putting spiritual structures on you that are keeping you from getting your healing, from expressing your spiritual giftings or blessings. I'm not trying to cause fear. I'm just giving you a free money option to consider for yourself. Now, you might have to invest, your faith, your time, some learning, some spiritual awareness in growing that, but ultimately, those are all good things. I'm just sharing what I've experienced myself from my perspective because I want you to be blessed. I'm going to share a lot of things that other churches and leaders are not going to share with you. Um, Consider Job 12, verse 7, that states, "But ask the beasts, and they will teach you, the birds of the heavens, and they will tell you, or the bushes of the earth, and they will teach you, and the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all these do not know that the hand of Yah, of God, has done this? In his hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind." I'm not saying to literally ask all these creatures and elements, although there are some people that do that and believe that they get results. They very well could. I'm not saying they're not, but I'm just saying at least asking the question about, where do we learn? How do we learn about Yah's kingdom, about how he created things? Again, he's put a lot of answers in the creation that are yet to be discovered, or spiritually yet to be discovered. He can work any number of different ways, but as one example, he's taught us a lot of things in nature. Many medicines, as I stated earlier, are just copies of what Yah, God, has provided. Many of the military planes, the drones, the submarines, etc., are designed after studying nature. You've heard the phrase, listen to your body. Although I'm not so good about that, other than just hearing it's time to eat. Um, but seriously, uh, does our spiritual body have something to tell us? I'm playing with this myself, and as I do with many other spiritual concepts. And to be honest, a lot of times I'm very surprised at the results I get. And I wish I could share everything as much as I wish that you would share what you're getting and, that you could share with others because we're all supposed to be learning from one another. But are you willing to step out, to expand your faith, to experience the living word more than you have as you let Yah's spirit guide you and loose the bonds of man-made doctrines and traditions? Just something to think about. But I pray that this blesses you. Um, this is Noe with Walk with Yah. And just know, maybe your miracle could be next.